As Sharon said, my name is Tara Watkins Vaughn. I'm still getting used to saying the Vaughn. I will be going by Tara Vaughn, but we're keeping the Watkins in there for now so that people can associate who I am with the name change here recently. I am the Commercial Ornamentals Extension Associate for the University of Kentucky. I work within the horticulture department on campus. Basically, commercial ornamentals is a fancy way of saying that I get to work with nursery crop growers, Christmas tree growers, and cut flower growers across our state. The biggest thing that I do is offer technical assistance to them. We do some extension publications, some extension programming, things of that nature. But I'm lucky enough that I get to see and appreciate the breadth of horticultural agriculture that's going on across the whole state. So I'm very fortunate. So today we're going to focus on cut flowers, and we're going to talk about some hardy annual options for the home grower. So, uh-oh, doesn't want to go. Okay, here we go. So we're going to start out by talking about really just understanding what a hardy annual is and understanding what hardiness actually means. And then we'll go into some hardy options here in Kentucky. So the biggest question I get is, what even is a hardy annual? People are familiar with summer annuals, things you plant in the spring after our last frost date. They grow and bloom during the summertime and maybe into the fall. Frost comes, it kills the plant. That's the life cycle of what is most commonly known as just an annual or possibly a summer annual. But we have this whole other classification of annuals that are hardy annuals, and they're much less known. So just simply put, having hardy annuals is really a great way to add additional variety and additional color to your garden or landscape, and it extends your bloom season. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that bloom season extension looks like. So just like a tender annual or those summer annuals that I just mentioned, it does go through its an entire life cycle or a life cycle in one season. So that's a common misconception, is that because it is winter hardy and these blooms will or these flowers will bloom in the spring, that it's not an annual, but it is truly an annual. It goes through its life cycle in one season. The biggest difference is that it can survive cold temperatures, unlike the traditional summer annuals that we think about. And in addition to surviving the cold temperatures, they actually prefer them. Most of these hardy annuals, if you were to plant them in the spring, April, May timeframe, they would actually not really do much for you because they do not like the heat. Once it starts heating up in June and July, most of them go kaput, either completely, or they'll kind of die back, go a little bit dormant for the summertime, and then some of them might start pushing some blooms again in the fall once things start cooling down to the temperatures that they prefer. So with hardy annuals here in Kentucky, they're either planted in the fall or in very early spring or late winter, and that's kind of dependent on our zones here in Kentucky. So we'll talk a little bit more about zones. I'm not sure quite how familiar this audience might be with the zones in Kentucky, but I'll do some explaining. So some of the science behind a hardy annual. One of the most important things to remember is that not all hardy annuals have the same hardiness level. So there might be some plants that can survive temperatures down to 10 degrees, and there might be some plants that only can survive temperatures down to 20 or so. So got to keep that in mind of when you want to plant things and the things that you do want to plant. So the growth slows for these plants as the temperatures cool and the days shorten. So I'm going to give an example here. I said we can fall plant or we can late winter, early spring plant. So if we're fall planting, typically we're planting usually late September, mid-September at the earliest, possibly all the way through mid-November. You guys are probably all from Kentucky, so you're very familiar with Kentucky's weather. It could be mid-November and be 70 degrees. And so, if we're experiencing a November like that, you can probably still plant these hardy annuals. You've got time to get them in the ground if you want. But as we're putting these annuals in the ground in the fall, You'll see while the temperatures are still warm, they'll be putting on some vegetative growth. But then as the day length really shortens, the closer we get to December, and the temperatures get more consistently cool, both in the daytime and nighttime, you'll see that the growth slows and the plants are still very much alive looking, but they're just hanging out there. They're just really not doing all too much over the winter unless we, again, you never know in Kentucky, might have an unusually warm winter and you might continue to see a little bit of growth, but again, it'll be a much slower rate. So the more stable you can keep the temperature around your plants, the better off your plants will be. So I know that's kind of difficult because you can't control what Mother Nature does, but some things that we can do to help keep the temperature a little bit more stable around our plants is if you have an area of your landscape that is most people's landscape is like right up against their house, right? So we've got the additional warmth from the house warming the soil that is right there up next to the house. So that can help. You might have a side of your house or an area of your yard where you have a hedgerow or something like that, and you're actually protecting these plants from wind. As we all know, it can get really cold in the winter, but the wind is what really can make it feel a whole lot colder. And so just how we feel that, these plants are feeling that too. So if you can give them a break and provide them a little bit more stable environment from the wind, that will really help them. Your plants will be better off. And sometimes you're just going to have some winter kill because really that's just nature. But if you put them in an environment like this, you'll lower the chances of that. So root establishment in cool temperatures is the key also. So again, over the winter, they're not really growing above ground that much, but you are having some below ground growth for sure. The roots are growing, they're getting nice and established so that when spring does get here and our temperatures start to warm, your plant is really going to be like ready to take off and start blooming for you. So again, this is part of the reason that I said if you plant this classification of annuals in April or May and they don't have time to get that good underground root establishment while the temperatures are still cool, you will see some struggle in your plants for sure. So now we're going to talk a little bit about understanding the USDA hardiness zones. So the hardiness zones are based on the average annual temperature minimum during winter. So this can be a lot to kind of wrap your mind around when you're trying to think about this if you're not familiar with it, but it's the average annual extreme minimum winter temperature. So to be honest with you, I'm not even quite sure what our average extreme minimum temperature is for our area of here in Kentucky, but let's just say it's 10 degrees. That correlates with our zone. So the difference between zones is 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and the difference between subzones is 5 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll look at a map here on the next slide, and these zones will make a little bit more sense. Wind, soil type, soil moisture, humidity, pollution, snow, duration of exposure, sunshine, all of these things play a part in calculating what our zone is and what plants can survive in our particular zone over the winter. So this is actually the old hardiness zone map. The USDA recently put out a new map. So as you can see here in this map, most of Kentucky used to be 6B. So those subzones that I just mentioned, most of Kentucky was in zone 6, but we've got 6A and 6B. A is a cooler zone, B is a little bit warmer, and then we'll jump down to 7A, and that's a whole different zone with warmer climate. So as we can expect, there's some pockets of 6A in Kentucky. Most of Kentucky was 6B, and then some of the western side of the state, which we do know is, trends to be warmer down there, they were in zone 7A. The USDA redid these maps. So in 2023, they put out a new edition. That last edition we just looked at was 2012. So last year they put out a new edition, and I know this is kind of looks like a jumbled map here, but all I want to show you here is that most of Kentucky is this peachy apricot color, which means practically the entire state moved to be a zone warmer, which, completely makes sense. We're seeing warmer weather trends in recent years. And so basically all they did was update, used weather data from across the country, across our state, to determine that, hey, actually, most of Kentucky is now in a different zone or at least subzone. This is the new hardiness map. Now, do not ask me why they chose to use 3 different shades of green to differentiate 3 different zones on the map, but they did. It's very hard to distinguish, so I hope you guys can see. But my pointer is here. I hope you guys can see that too. And we can see here in most of this north and eastern part of the state, that the state is still in 6B. So we have no 6A left in Kentucky. Everybody that was 6A has now moved to 6B, and then some folks who were 6B are still hanging out in 6B. But the majority of the state has now moved to zone 7A. So we're actually a whole different zone warmer now, which basically means that we are somewhere in between 5 to 10 different degrees warmer for our average minimum extreme winter temperature than we were when the data was taken to make the 2012 map. Data from, I believe, like the 70s all the way up through 2009 is when they started generating this map. So 30 to 40 years of data or so was used to make that map. So between then and now, we've gotten about 5 to 10 degrees warmer over winter, which is interesting stuff in and of itself to me. And then over here in the far western side of the state, we've got just a little bit down here that has actually moved to a different subzone, so subzone 7B. So this is important to understand because some of the hardy annual options that we'll be going through here in a minute are only hardy to certain zones. So knowing what zone you live in is part of the reason that it's important to understand these hardiness zones. So let's go over some hardy options in Kentucky. Oh, there we go. So I just picked a few. There are a lot of hardy annuals that are that we can grow here in Kentucky. I chose to focus on the ones that do not need any row cover help. And what I mean by row cover help is because I typically work with cut flower growers that are growing on a more commercial scale or have businesses that are with a for-profit mindset. A lot of times these growers will have either high tunnels or low tunnels with some sort of frost cloth and or plastic row cover to help essentially baby their plants along through the winter. And so you can actually, if you're choosing to use that method, you can, your palette of options of flowers to grow is actually expanded quite a bit because you can grow things, more options that maybe aren't quite so cold hardy, but you're babying along in these warm plastic or frost cloth covered tunnels. So I'm not focusing on those today, but if you guys have questions about those at the end, I'd be happy to talk about them. So bachelor's buttons, probably a lot of people are familiar with bachelor's buttons. The really nice thing about bachelor's buttons is that they're super easy to grow. You can basically just throw seed out, sprinkle seed on the ground, rough the ground up to get it kind of mixed in that very top layer of soil, and it will grow for you. It's also known as cornflower, which is kind of odd to me. It resembles nothing of corn, so I don't know why we call it cornflower, but we do. It has a winter hardiness of zone 6. So what that means is this flower, you can plant it in zone 6, or as low as zone 6, leave it alone through the winter, and generally it will come out on the other side. Now, again, these zones are based on our winter averages. So sometimes if we have like these polar vortexes or Arctic blasts or whatever you want to call them that we've had for the last couple of years, where we get several days in a row of 0 or in some places even sub-zero temperatures with wind chills, that might not necessarily hold true. You might end up with some winter kill on some of these things. But generally, bachelor's buttons is going to be hardy to zone 6. The nice thing about them is they can be fall planted or spring planted. And again, remember when I'm saying spring planted, we're talking about very early spring or even late winter. So we're thinking like February and March. If you're planting any later than that, you're really getting too late, especially because we know that sometimes Kentucky can hit 70 degrees in April. The nice thing about them is that they are an early bloomer. So this is something that will add some color to your landscape or garden very early in the season. Also, people love bachelor's buttons because there are not very many blue flowers out there. And these are a tried and true bright and vibrant blue. So people love these as well. Beneficial insects also love them. They attract beneficial insects. So if you're trying to attract insects in general, and especially beneficials to your garden, to your landscape, this is a really good option. Okay. Another is Bupleurum. Its winter hardiness is zone 5. So that means it can handle some pretty cold temperatures and it'll do just fine. Just to give you a little bit of reference, zone 5 is typically like southern Minnesota, Wisconsin, northern Michigan type of areas. So it can definitely do well down here. Again, it can be fall planted or spring planted. It's generally happiest if you direct seed it outdoors. It's one of those that you can sprinkle a little bit of seed out in your garden area and it will just come up. Now, I will say that bachelor's buttons, both bachelor's buttons and Bupleurum, if you do let these items go to seed in your landscape, they will be there forever. So please take that into account. They are very good at self-sowing and multiplying in subsequent years. So take that into account. If you're planning this garden for cut purposes, I stuck this in here. You want to harvest these before the little yellow flowers, these umbels that you see here in the picture, start to turn color. If you do cut these are basically a one and done crop. So you cut this and it's done. It's kind of like a sunflower. Most sunflowers, with the exception of some branching varieties, you cut that stem and that flower is done. You've terminated it. So bachelor's buttons will just keep reblooming and keep reblooming whether you cut it or not. But Bupleurum will not. I do also want to point out, I meant to say this in this slide. I took these photos from a variety of Kentucky cut flower growers. So all of the flowers that you see in these pictures were grown by Kentucky growers, which I think is pretty neat. You'll see the photo credit down here in the either bottom left or bottom right if you're curious. Okay, another one that is really popular is Dianthus. Its common name is Sweet William. I think that's what a lot of people know it by, especially in home gardening. It also has a winter hardiness of zone 5, again, fall or spring planted. The awesome thing about Sweet William is that you can grow it in so many colors. If you want an ombre pink, like here in this photo, we've got some darker, lighter, and even lighter pink all on the same stems. You can do that. You can get a bicolor purple and white. You can even get dark maroon. You can get neon pink, lots of different colors. So it's the beautiful thing about Sweet William. And the flowers are just so full and colorful. People love it. It is one of those that it shows off in probably about the May timeframe, especially if you're fall planting. If you're spring planting, it might be a little bit behind and maybe more like early June, possibly late May. But it'll kind of slow down and won't really be as aggressive on its bloom producing in the heat of summer. But then once the temperatures start cooling towards the fall, you'll get nice fall blooms as well. Another is Campanula. Its common name, people will often know it as bellflower or Canterbury bells. It also has a winter hardiness of zone 5, so it'll do great here in Kentucky. This is one that it either must be started indoors, the seeds started indoors, or you need to buy in plugs if that's something that you're interested in from a garden center or from some sort of plug broker. It does not do well just by scattering its seeds in the garden or in the landscaping. but it can be fall planted or again, early spring planted. And I did put early spring in here to emphasize that because it is a day length sensitive plant. So what that means is while the day length is short, meaning less than 12 hours, maybe up to 13 hours at absolute most, the flower is going to, or the plant is going to focus on producing vegetative growth and growing its stem length. Once we reach a point of a day length over that 12 to 13 hour mark, it starts telling the plant to start producing its flower. And so if what that means is if you get these plants planted out into your landscape or garden a little bit too late, and you don't give it that day length time it needs to shoot up stems so that you have nice, tall, full, pretty flowers, it's very possible, and this happens to a lot of people before they realize and understand what day length sensitive means, you'll get blooms that are blooming, this small. Now, that's not a problem if you just have them in your landscape for some additional color or just uniqueness, because, I mean, how cool are these? But if you're wanting something that's taller and fuller and bushier, you're going to need to consider that day length sensitive aspect of it. Delphinium. Delphinium here in Kentucky. Again, I am coming at this from a cut flowers mindset, but delphinium is typically treated as an annual here in Kentucky, though it can be considered a perennial. If you can get the plant to stay happy enough throughout the summer to have it come back year after year, what you're going to see is just generally not as big, aggressive, impressive blooms as you did in previous years. So that's the reason it's most often treated as an annual here in Kentucky. But they're tall spikes that come in different shades of whites, blues, and purples. And blues, again, is one of those coveted flower colors that there's just not a whole lot of blue flowers out there. So another reason that people love delphinium, it's got a winter hardiness of zone 3. So if you needed to move to northern Canada, you can probably still grow delphinium there. So this is one that you can really put out there and just let Mother Nature beat it, and it really doesn't blink an eye. So that's nice. It is one that needs to be started indoors. It will not do well with just having seeds scattered out into the garden. Even starting it indoors is a little bit tricky. So a lot of people will buy plugs from a garden center or some other source if they're looking to grow delphinium. Ideal for fall planting. So this is one, again, a lot of these things can be fall or spring planted, but this one is best suited for fall planting because it really kind of just grasps and really loves those cold winter temperatures. So fall plant these if you can. Digitalis, most people know it as foxglove. It has a winter hardiness of zone 5, so again, we'll do just fine here. It does prefer indoor starting, but it also can be sown outdoors. This is one that you scatter a packet of 100 seeds in a certain area of your landscape, you're going to have probably more than likely a decent amount germinate, but nowhere near 100, simply because it does prefer to be started indoors, and not all of them are going to take hold by being sown outdoors. Great for fall planting, can also be spring planted. It's a prolific bloomer like many of the ones that we've talked about, but the thing to be noted here with this is that all parts of foxglove are poisonous. Parts of some other flowers that we've talked about, delphinium, are also poisonous. It's one of those that you really have to, either humans or animals, pets, dogs, cats, would really have to ingest a lot of it for it to be harmful, more than just like a upset stomach for a couple of hours. But foxglove is a little bit more poisonous, where you could eat a smaller amount of it, and it would have a greater effect. So keep that in mind if you're wanting to put foxglove in and you have cats or dogs that are curious little creatures and like to snack on your blooms. Hopefully not anyway, but just in case. Feverfew. I absolutely adore feverfew. Love it so much. Winter hardiness, zone 5. Again, it does best with fall planting, but it can be spring planted too. And it can come back every year. So again, these are annuals. Some of them can come back every year, but generally they perform best if being treated as an annual and being replaced every year. But these can come back every year actually, and do pretty decent, at least for like a 2 to 3 year cycle. Prefers to be started inside, but can be sown outdoors as well. An interesting fact about it, these cute little daisy-like flowers, it seems like they would probably be a great attractant for insects, and they're actually not. It repels pretty much all insects, even beneficial ones. So just an interesting note. Larkspur can be poisonous as well. Tall spikes, similar to delphinium, comes in shades of whites, blues, purples, and pinks. So people love them for that spring color. Generally, it can be sowed outdoors. It does really well. Can start indoors, but it's one of those that it doesn't like its roots disturbed, so it really wants to be started in the area that it's going to stay. With these, you also generally just get one cut if you're using them for cut purposes. But if you cut it, it will maybe send up some smaller, less impressive, but still pretty and colorful side shoots as well. I know we're running out of time. I think I just have like 3 more flowers here, so we'll go through them quickly. Nigella, its common name is Love in a Mist. Again, popular because it is one of the fewer or one of the options for blue flowers this time of year as well. Prefers to be sown outdoors like larkspur does. Prefers fall planting, but it can be spring planted. Both flowers and seed pods are fun. So I didn't put a photo up here. I probably should have, but these pretty little flowers that you see over here, in just a few days, if you were to leave these attached to the plant, they would have turned into these really pretty and unique seed pods, that you can leave there and collect seeds from if you'd like, or the seed pods, are really useful for drying as well. Last one, this is yarrow. A lot of people probably know it most for its many range of colors and also for the medicinal purposes that it has. It can be fall or spring planted. Generally, I recommend fall planting if you want a nice spring flush of flowers. Sometimes if you plant in the spring, you might not get any blooms until fall, or you might get a few kind of unimpressive blooms in the spring. You can get that fall flush too, even if it blooms in the spring, it'll kind of lay low in the summer and then bloom again for you in the fall. Again, so many colors. I chose my favorite one to put up here is the peachy coral apricot colors. And then it'll come back even better in its second and third year. So it'll have even more impressive stems and more impressive blooms in its second and third years of life. Once you start reaching year 4, or if you're really lucky 5, the plants start to get a little bit tired, unimpressive, and I recommend that you resow. Okay, so those are just some options. Let's wrap it all up. It's important to understand what your hardiness zones mean because it helps you determine what flowers you might want to grow. And then the bigger thing is to understand the tendencies of your microclimate. If there's features about your area, even your neighborhood or your particular yard, you have a low-lying area, whatever it might be, it's important to understand the tendencies of those microclimates because it'll help determine how well these plants will do over winter. Forgive yourself when things die. It's Mother Nature. It's trial and error. It's okay. And then embrace the world of cool and colorful. There are really so many great options in the cool hardy category that a lot of people don't even know anything about. Okay, so with that, I don't know if there were any questions put in the chat while I was talking, but I'm happy to take some questions.